Hi, thanks for joining me. Today I want to share with you some simple tips about how to make your spiritual practice easier. If you're serious about discovering, exploring, and experiencing the spiritual side of your nature, you really have to be doing some kind of spiritual practice regularly. Regularly means every day. Sometimes when you've been doing the same spiritual practice for many months or even years, you can go through periods of sort of dryness where you kind of lose enthusiasm and you don't get the same kind of energy boost from doing the spiritual practice that you did earlier when you used to do it, when you started doing it. So it's really important that you need to keep finding ways to energize your spiritual practice, to inject new life into it. And you can do that by adding variations and adding some simple elements which will continue to make it interesting and energizing and will give you more enthusiasm to keep doing it consistently every day. Now, I've been through this process for years and years. I've been doing my spiritual practice, and over the years it's changed a little bit and it's developed and it's taken on new forms as I discovered new things. During my time at the monastery, I was privileged to be exposed to a very simple, very powerful way of energizing your spiritual practice so that it really does connect you with your spiritual inner self, where you can get so much grace and so much power from doing this. So the first ingredient for making your spiritual practice more powerful is to create a reservoir of power somewhere in your home or somewhere where you go regularly to do your spiritual practice. Now, this can be a kind of a sacred space, which is especially for you. And in this sacred space, that's where you give yourself the time and the space dedicated to your soul, to your spirit. Now, this could be anywhere in your home, it could be a room, or even just as simple as a shelf in your room, even a cupboard or a desktop or a dresser top, anything like this. The idea is to create a little space where you can put some physical objects which have meaning to you, some kind of sacred objects which inspire you with spiritual energy and help create a good positive mood for you when you do your spiritual practice. The principle behind having a sacred space is that each time you sit and do your spiritual practice, you're basically charging up these physical objects, or you're charging up this physical space, and you're charging it up with a spiritual vibration. Now, you can nurture that energy if you treat your sacred space with reverence and respect, if you care for it, and if you don't disturb it with other strange vibrations from other people in your family or in the house. You want to keep it somewhere nice and special and quiet. When you nurture that space, the energy from your spiritual practice builds up in these physical objects over time, and it slowly increases and increases, and it becomes like a battery, like an external battery that you can literally, almost literally, plug into to recharge your spiritual energy. And it's absolutely fantastic in moments when you are feeling a little bit low, a little bit down, lacking that concentration, or you're lacking that motivation to do your spiritual practice. And when you come to your sacred space and you sit down quietly before it, it immediately lifts your mood, and immediately you start to feel the presence of that spiritual energy that you've been nurturing. And this can be an invaluable help during your spiritual practice throughout your life. If you have a sacred space in your home or somewhere where you go regularly, that will help you a lot in your spiritual practice. Now, the second ingredient for developing a successful, consistent spiritual practice is to develop a routine and a habit. Now, the idea is to make this the kind of habit that you can just do automatically without having to think too much. In the same way that you go and brush your teeth in the morning or in the evening, make it into a habit Make it the same time every day. It could even just be a few minutes. And you have that regular routine that you go to every day. Now, what this does is it creates a kind of resonant frequency. At the same time, every day, the spiritual energy will peak because you're putting into it your spiritual energy. And you can take advantage of that in moments when you're feeling a bit down or a bit low, or when you're lacking that enthusiasm and motivation, to lift your own mood and to help with your concentration for your spiritual practice. And it's very important to create that resonant energy at the same time every day. So even if you don't have time to do your normal spiritual routine, at least you should just go at that time for 2 minutes, even if it's just like to say, hi, sacred space, I'm sorry I haven't got any time to do my spiritual practice. Just pop my head in to say hi and I'll see you tomorrow. Even if you just do that, you'll be creating that kind of resonant vibration. And that's what's important about developing a spiritual routine. Now, the third ingredient is to use sound with your spiritual practice. Sound is a fantastic way to concentrate your mind and to concentrate the focus of your heart and your spirit in your spiritual practice. Now, this can take the form of, anything that is appropriate for you. It could be music, it could be chanting or prayer or affirmations, anything which creates a physical sound. And use that because that will help to lift your mood and it will help to get you into that frame of mind for doing your spiritual practice. The fourth ingredient to enhance your spiritual routine is to use movement. Physical movement is another great way to keep you focused and concentrated, especially when you're feeling tired or it's difficult for you to concentrate or you're feeling distracted by problems and things in your mind. So when I say movement, it really can be anything. It can be something very subtle, like just waving an incense stick around. That's a little bit of movement. It could be sort of fingering your rosary beads. It could be even just moving your body, rocking like a little back and forth like this if you're praying or chanting. Any kind of movement like this is a great way it keeps you alert. It stops you falling asleep as well in some cases when you're tired. And it can also alleviate discomfort for sitting still for periods of time if you have trouble sitting still for doing your spiritual practice. It can also be other kinds of movement, a bit more dramatic movement like dance or yoga. Anything like this can be a spiritual exercise using the whole body to help you focus in the present and to give you that energy for your spiritual practice. And the fifth ingredient to make your spiritual practice easier is to always start with the same routine. Whatever your spiritual practice is, whether it's to do with chanting or meditation, always use the same things, the same steps before you go into your deeper spiritual practice. Now, the principle behind this is to do with, it's a psychological principle, basically, from psychology, is conditioning. Simple, conditioning. You're conditioning your mind and your thoughts to go into higher states of consciousness. You may or may not know about some of the famous experiments in psychology with Professor Pavlov and his dog, that every time he went to feed his dog, he would ring a bell first, and the dog salivated because it knew it was going to get the food. Then he would continue to ring the bell regularly, but without giving the dog food. Now the dog would still salivate because it was conditioned to think that when it heard the bell, it was going to get the food. That's a very basic psychological principle, but the same applies at other levels of the human being in terms of mental activity, cognitive functions. You can condition and train your mind and even your physiological state and your emotions. When you do the same routine for your spiritual practice, you're conditioning your mind, your body, your emotions to go into that state of spiritual consciousness. It's very much like Pavlov's dog when it heard the bell and it would start to salivate, thinking it was going to get the food. In the same way, your whole human nature kind of salivates spiritually in a way, because it's preparing itself to go into those higher levels of consciousness. And when you have that same routine, when you start your spiritual practice, you're conditioning your mind and your body and your thoughts to immediately start going into that state of readiness for the deeper stages of your spiritual practice. You can add variation with your spiritual practice, but just make sure that you've got that same routine to begin with that you do every time. So these are the 5 simple ingredients for making your spiritual practice more easier. That is, to create a reservoir of power in your home somewhere, a sacred space. And the second is to create a daily routine of doing it regularly. And third is to use sound, such as music or chanting or prayer or anything like that. And fourth is to use movement of your body to help you focus and stay more alert in your spiritual practice. And the fifth is to do the same thing to begin your spiritual practice, so that you're conditioning your mind and your thoughts to get into that level of consciousness. Now, the beauty of these 5 ingredients, these 5 steps, is that they can be adapted to any kind of spiritual practice. So whatever spiritual tradition you come from, you can adapt these 5 ingredients and use them and make them your own to enhance your spiritual practice, inject new life into it, and to make it more consistent so that it starts to give you energy and grace. And when you start to get into that deeper connection with your spiritual nature, you'll start to feel more and more and more that grace and that beautiful love that comes from your inner spirit. When you get to that level of your spiritual practice, it becomes so much easier to be doing this consistently, because you realize that that is your true nature. And when you start to experience that regularly, you don't really want to go back to the old human being that you were before. It's much more fulfilling to be in that connection with your spiritual nature. So I do hope that's been helpful for you. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Do leave some comments. And I'd also love to know if you've got any ideas yourself of ways that you can make your own spiritual practice more interesting and engaging. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.